Alright everyone, it's time. Harvest League review. In today's video, I'm gonna review and recap the Harvest League experience. However, I also want to talk about the league's mechanics, controversial accessibility, so stay tuned for that. The video is gonna be a bit long, but then again, that's the norm recently in the channel. At the same time, for the background gameplay, I'll have different builds fighting Sirius on Awakener level 8, and if I remember when posting this, I'll put cards to the build guides of each character if you wanna give those a shot. Anyways, if you are new around here and you enjoy the content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, a rating and a comment help us defeat the evil YouTube algorithm. And also, before we actually begin with this ungodly long video, if you want to skip to certain points in it, I'm gonna timestamp the different topics so that you can follow those in the description, the comments or video description. Moving on to the actual meaty part of the video, I'm gonna be dead honest, I've rewritten this script a couple of times because I intend to begin the review with a brief description of the league mechanic, and to be frank, it comes out even more botched and complicated than Harvest itself. So I'm gonna give that another shot and I'll try to keep it short, so if I skip out on any details, feel free to complete or correct me in the comments. With that said, let's attempt a short recap of Harvest mechanics. Harvest was all about crafting. In order to get our crafting recipes and materials, we had to plant the seeds that we'd find in seed caches across our adventures on the main story or in the Atlas. The seeds had to be planted in Oshabi's sacred grove in order to reap the rewards. The seeds themselves were divided into three categories: wild, vivid and primal. Each category of seed had a corresponding set of seed types that will net you different crafting recipes, and at the same time, the seeds will require the player to play for a couple of growth cycles in order to fully grow and allow harvesting. These growth cycles involved interacting with the seed caches a couple of times to get the seeds fully grown. However, the wild, vivid and primal seed categories were also divided into 4 tiers. In order to get to the next tier of seeds, you had to grow and harvest seeds in an escalating order. For example, to get tier 2, you had to harvest tier 1 seeds, rinse and repeat for the higher tiers, and with higher tier of seeds came longer growth cycles, which meant playing longer to get the higher tier seeds grown. When it came to actually doing the honest work, planting and harvesting seeds inside a corresponding collector will net you life force, which was the quote-unquote fuel that will allow you to craft after a successful harvest. If you ran out of life force, you wouldn't be able to craft anymore. Life force was also used to craft the tools that you placed in the garden to micromanage the efficiency of your harvests. Things like additional collectors, pylons, storage tanks, dispersers and horticrafting stations. These last ones were for storing crafts for later use, further enabling the controversies of this league, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Part of the early challenge with the league mechanic was managing both the life force to craft the gardening tools and the space in the garden to accommodate those very tools. You could also use flowers that were added a bit after the league released to boost the chances of gaining more crafting recipes, rarer crafting outcomes or increasing the life force to finance the crafting session you were about to have. These were pretty powerful, as you might have guessed. However, the garden's shenanigans weren't the main focus of the league. The goal was crafting, and boy crafting did we do. So to get the juicy controversial crafting going, you had to plant some seeds, wait for the growth cycle to be over, harvest them and interact with the collector to find out what can you do with the seeds you just harvested. Generally speaking, the common crafting outcomes were reforging a normal or magic item, reforging a rare item, randomizing the values of X modifier, augmenting an X modifier, removing an X modifier, remove X modifier and augment X modifier, remove a non-X modifier and augment X modifier, where the X is stuff such as life, speed, fire, lightning, cold, chaos, etc. Stuff like that. There were other crafts. Some modified socket colors, some linked sockets, some allowed you to gamble unique items. Other crafts in the higher seed tiers allowed currency exchanges, operates Atlas device modifiers, etc. And I am not going to dig into those because I barely use them, and you could argue that they were also very strong, but in my humble opinion, I feel like the main meaty topic of slamming your gear nonchalantly is far more important, so let us talk about those previously mentioned crafting outcomes. The reforges were nothing groundbreaking. Think of them like free regals or alchemy orbs, fossils, essences and chaos orbs. The randomizer crafts were like targeted divines, as they will only affect the modifier type that they specified. These crafts were rather harmless in comparison to the next ones. That isn't to say that they weren't powerful or good, but I will go out in a limb and claim that nobody was really flipping their shit over these crafts, except maybe for the critical or speed reforging, but we'll get there in a bit. However, past this point, it's time to get those controversies up. Augment crafts were targeted exalted slams. As such, they will guarantee a modifier of a specific type on use. Remove crafts were targeted annulment orbs. They will remove the specified modifier type. Remove and augment were pretty much the previous two combined, equally as strong and sought after. Remove a non-X mod and augment an X mod were also pretty strong, but a bit volatile because while they could save or help you perfect an item, they could also break it in the end due to their randomness. Still strong, not quite like the previous ones, but useful in the end, which is what matters. So now you may ask, what is the problem about the crafting recipes? Well, for starters, these crafts can help you force the existence of powerful and sought after modifiers on your gear for arguably little investment. On any other league, if you can benchcraft a resist or life into armor or some damage into a weapon, that is more than enough. Maybe spend 2 exiles crafting 3 modifiers, but that's about it. However, with Harvest, if you found something that was lacking in any shape or form, you could fix it into borderline perfection. Granted, most people, myself included, would have had enough with tier 3 or tier 2 modifiers on their stuff, but Harvest enabled you to push beyond that. And this is where things get spicy, because with Harvest, you could also force the sought after mods without requiring more than an item base with an influence at the correct item level. For example, if you got boots with at least an item level of 75 with Hunter influence, you could use Harvest to force the item to have a nice chunk of life or defenses, a nice amount of movement speed, double resistances and tailwind on a critical strike. How? Using remove and augment modifiers to your heart contempt until you get something that you're happy with, or using the critical or speed reforges. That way you can guarantee the tailwind and use remove and augment crafts to finish it off, or at least until it hits the rolls you want. And tailwind on boots is just an example. The exploded chest with useful life and resists? Check. An amulet with crit multi, Physis extra fire, spell damage, life and chaos res? Check. A helmet with a good enchantment using an extra power charge, global crit multi, life and resistances? Check. All of these were doable, more than doable, if you had the knowledge, time and patience to force the modifiers that you needed. The entire process nets you a very strong item without relying on you having a bunch of currency to craft it, or having to depend on trade to get the item when you fail to craft it on your own. In the end, you could either use the crafted item or sell it away, which is kinda what I did. As a little fun fact, that's where the majority of my currency came from this league. I crafted a bunch of stuff, mostly Arcanist and 2-tone boots with tailwind and decent modifiers. I made like 4 to 6 exiles per pair of boots, but that's besides the point. The point is that with Harvest you could force things that will otherwise take a lot of normal currency to craft. On any other league, you're sort of gambling your crafting currency on items to hopefully get something semi-usable that you can complete with bench crafts or use as it is. With Harvest though, you can turn a semi-usable item into a top tier one without having to break the bank or develop carpal tunnel. The league mechanic enabled a lot of things, but here's the dilemma. Was that a bad thing or a good thing? First, I will admit that personally I did like Harvest. I had a fun time interacting with the garden, managing the space, saving up crafts for later use, fixing items to usable or tradable standards, making strong gear, etc. I liked all of that. But I knew that all of this wasn't gonna be possible beyond Harvest, and I knew that because when Grinding Gear Games unveiled Harvest, they made it explicit that the league mechanic wasn't gonna go forward, that it will break the game because of how powerful it is. I understood that and I proceeded to make the most out of it. If you've been following my channel this entire league, you saw how powerful certain characters got, and it was mostly thanks to the garden. I know that going forward that is not gonna be as possible, without having to invest more time and currency into the characters. That isn't gonna limit me from making builds in the future, but that does mean that I have to keep things a bit more realistic, since Harvest enabled some very wacky and powerful stuff on a regular basis. Alright, but was Harvest good or bad? And in my eyes, it was a good league. In fact, it is way too good, which is why it is not coming with us anytime soon. It enabled us, the players, to reach power levels that are borderline unheard of, and that is why Harvest cannot be implemented into the game unless it's gamed or nerfed considerably. The problem with Harvest's mechanics is that it allowed the existence of more than what anyone would consider realistic or necessary. People apparently running around with mirror tier gear, not having to rely on trade for the gear, close to perfect gear being the norm or the base to work off. It sounds fun and all, but on reality it isn't normal if a good chunk of the population is achieving this by only interacting with the league mechanic. And this is where the conflicting points of view began popping up. Because a lot of people like this version of Path of Exile, the one where they can have the things they want without having to fork tons of currency or spending a lot of time grinding to acquire their items. But on the other hand, this is why Harvest was also disliked, because it was softening the challenge of Path of Exile by allowing players to push beyond the game's current balance by making everything accessible. This is the interesting part, because this is the conflicting viewpoint that resulted in constant clashes between the self-appointed casual player and the self-appointed 1%. The 1%, or realistically speaking the more dedicated player, will argue that the game was becoming easier, which in the long term is bad. And on the other side you have people that are less invested arguing that the crafting never felt better, which is good. And both of these sides are actually not wrong. The problem with these trains of thought, however, comes when they resonate with the wrong kinds of people. And you probably saw it when the discussion quickly devolved into people claiming that anyone who liked Harvest and wanted Harvest to stay is a casual baby who can't play the game correctly, or that anyone who likes Harvest likes easy games and wants Path of Exile to become easier, or that anyone who likes Harvest should just fuck off and go play something that fits their power trip, etc, etc. But on the other hand, you have people attacking more dedicated players, calling them tryhard elitists, jealous 1% no-lifers, or claiming that they are butthurt because a no-name self-appointed casual finally caught up to them, etc, etc. The interesting part about all of this is that this isn't unheard of in gaming nowadays. I don't know if it's the entire lockdown that we've got going on due to the current state of the planet, but there seems to be a growing discomfort in gaming nowadays between the different ages in their communities. More often than not, the less dedicated gamer has some very wacky opinions. For some reason, these people feel entitled to have the same gear, power and skill as the hardcore player without investing the same time and currency as them. While on the other hand, the hardcore gamer wants games to be more challenging and far more punishing because they have achieved a level in a game where nothing faces them anymore. And in Path of Exile you can notice that there is a huge disparity between how the 1% does things and how the less dedicated player plays the game. Where the 1% saw Harvest enable crafts as too powerful due to how common the best modifiers were, and the less dedicated player finally got to experience power that helped ease their experience. And sure, there are bad apples everywhere. The elitist who tells anyone to fuck off because they don't agree with them is equally as petty and bad as anyone asking Sirius to be removed from the game because they haven't been able to kill him a single time since he was added into the game. And coming back to Harvest, it's great that a lot of people got to experience for themselves the cool intrinsicies of the crafting system in Path of Exile without any repercussion. However, it is also those non-existent repercussions that showcase why Harvest is not a good addition to Path of Exile in the long term. And why is it that Harvest, despite being a godsend to the less invested player, a bad thing? Because the game is not balanced for it. And I know that you probably heard this one before, but let me explain. If Harvest was to be implemented into the game, we'd have this situation where a lot of uncommon, sought after things will become the norm. Tailwind boots, exploded chest, close to perfect DPS weapons, etc. As fun as it is to cram them into every character and build, the game is not balanced around that. And what do I mean by balance? It's the damage dealt by monsters, the damage taken by monsters, the monster health, frequency of death effects, punishing modifiers, things that can challenge the player, things that can kill the player, in their current state, these are not balanced for Harvest shenanigans. Sure, killing a boss in mere seconds is an enjoyable sight, but it is not good in the long term if everyone is doing it, because it gives the fake impression that there is no challenge anymore. If everyone is a walking apocalypse, then the developers need to bump the stakes to challenge that power level. This will mean making the game harder than it already is, and I know that to the 1% Path of Exile outside Harvest is a very easy experience, or rather unchallenging. But the reality is that not everyone is as skilled or knowledgeable at Path of Exile. I know that, realistically speaking, you don't need 20 million DPS to kill Sirius. I know that you don't need your character to be a 90% damage mitigation, 15k effective HP monster. In the end, if you have the mechanical skill, even a weak character with decent DPS can be used to defeat the endgame bosses. It is not gonna be as fast, it may be sketchy, but if you know what you're doing and you've got the skill, it may be doable. But as I said, not everyone is that skilled or pushes themselves to that degree. Some people like removing all challenge by overgearing or overleveling. Others like the challenge and like limiting themselves to keep the thrill at the highest level all the time. At the same time, not everyone is super knowledgeable about the game. Not everyone lurks the wiki or the database 24/7, learning about cool interactions or skill functions. Not everyone downloads Path of Building and plays around with build ideas non-stop. And it is not their fault that they don't use these tools, because it is not their obligation to do so. The game doesn't force you to do any of that. You do it because you want to be better at the game at your own accord, not because it is imposed on you. That is the difference between the casual and the hardcore. One is here to play the game for the sake of playing, to spend the free time they've got. The other one is here to become a better player despite the little free time they've got, and overcome the challenges that the game has in store for them. Attacking each other because they hold conflicting points of views get us nowhere, and it's rather petty. Not everyone is gonna be the best at everything, and that is absolutely fine. With Harvest, Timmy Two Thumbs is one-shotting tier 16 bosses without investing obscene amounts of currency into their character. He also kills the endgame bosses before they even move. But on the other hand, Timmy Two Thumbs spent his entire playtime testing ideas on Path of Building, learning mechanics and information in the wiki or the PoE database, and then farming seed crafts, perfecting his gear beyond any logical need so that his experience was as smooth as possible. Is that a casual player to you? Someone who goes beyond requirements to make his characters or game experience a smoother, easier ride? Or is that a hardcore player, someone who is spending more time earning knowledge that is arguably of zero use outside Path of Exile, but he does that because he loves the game and he wants to see how far he can push the crafting or his character? All I know is that Harvest was a good league for me. I had fun, I liked it, I crafted a lot of very dumb things that I will proudly hold on to in Standard, even if I don't use them or touch them ever again. I understood why Harvest wasn't getting implemented into the core game. The things it enables in its current form are too good, too powerful, too common to be left untouched. If Harvest got neutered and re-added, then I can see myself interacting with it. Hopefully it does come back in some form eventually, or at least the targeted crafting. Until then, I give this league an 8 out of 10, and that is mostly because Oshavi disappears after playing the league mechanic for like a day or two. How will I know about my Wi-Fi progress? Anyways, that's it for this video. It is long, I tried to keep it succinct, but I couldn't do it, so fuck it. That is also for Harvest, I think, and now we wait for Heist, which should be fun, and if it isn't, fuck it, because we're gonna play it anyways. So thank you so much for watching today's video, and if you are new around here, don't forget to sub. A comment and a rating are welcome as well. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Take care and peace out.